So again, you can see where it all came from. I know this is hard for some folks, but you have come back to see it. Not one group, by the thousands who come here, is getting this like you're getting it. Now you see the cow had a rule over the king horse that you see right here, that every king that was born, like horse born in this chapel right here. Put this in your own mental court of law. Let's see all the evidence. And once all the evidence is presented, we can see where European Western version of Christianity copied from this. Right. And judge it for yourself. You've heard their side of the story? Take time out and hear your ancestors' side of the story. We're not saying for you to believe it, but just like the court of law of Ma'at, let's put it on the Makaru. Let's put it in the witness stand of truth, justice, and righteousness on the square. And we want to hear the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And then judge it in this middle court of law. Our African ancestors, brothers and sisters, saw the matrilineal system. Keep in mind that all the kings had to come through the line of the woman. Is that right? What man can say he didn't come from a woman? Please step forward so we can understand where you came from. So our ancestors had no problems understanding that divine principle of that sacred womb where we all came from. That was the basis and foundation of the goddess principle and the matrilineal system in Africa. And our ancestors saw, in order for the king to rule the throne, like you have Ursa Ma'at right here, the goddess Sheshat. Here you see her in the tree of divine wisdom, giving the fruit of divine knowledge and wisdom in order for him to rule the throne. It had nothing to do with no tree of good and evil. The patriarchs who came from the north, the Hyksos and others, who had a misogynistic nature, a hatred towards the woman, could not conceive of a woman nor a goddess giving a man anything. And that story was corrupted. The tree of divine wisdom and divine life was corrupted into the tree of what? Because here we have that they created in their biblical stories and the opening of the pages in Genesis that there was Adam and Eve, is that right? And they were not to eat of the tree of what? Knowledge of what? Good and evil. Now who was seduced by the serpent and ate from the tree? That's why, sisters, you got to watch and hear that sound. Psst. But anyway, here we see that she was seduced to eat the fruit, and then she seduced who? Adam. Now we are told that that's the reason for the world's sins of this first woman eating of the tree of good and evil, and that that's also not only the reason for the world's sins, but her monthly cycle is to remind her of that sin. This is what's taught in the church. Okay? Now when sisters start jacking that preacher up, who's been equally spiritually enslaved himself, to tell that story, and that we were born in sin, there was no story whatsoever in the Kemetic Nile Valley that we were born in sin. So a few years ago, back in 1988, boy, time is fast. Seemed like I just got this yesterday. Brother and sister showed me, they said, hey, brother, Quasi, you see, there was a black Adam and Eve. Although they made a black Adam and Eve, that has nothing to do with our story. This is what we see the evolutionists and creationists fighting each other, and they know anthropological studies that black people were first, so they put a black Adam and Eve, and gave Adam a jerry curl, and gave Eve a weave. You know, they had to be looking good for each other back then, you know. But it had nothing to do with our story, brothers and sisters. Even though they make it black to make you accept it, this is not still an African story. The African story is the goddess Sheshat giving the fruit of divine life from the tree of divine life and wisdom in order for the king to rule the throne. What you see behind me is not a spaceship that landed and happened and didn't make it back. Okay, what you see right there is the pyramid, is the boat of Khufu. That is his solar boat. This boat is 140 feet long, longer than Captain Cook's boat. When this boat was excavated in 1954 in a pit, over 1,200 pieces, the boat was dismantled. And they reconstructed, took 1,200 pieces to reconstruct this boat of Khufu. Now, what was the purpose of this boat? This boat was called the Nuank. What is the Nuank? What was the Nuank? The flooding of the Nile was called the Nuank. Now, when the Nile flooded, it was Khufu who realized that he could take his solar astral journey through the Nile to the celestial Nile, that was the Milky Way, to take him back to his father, Asar. So the Milky Way was looked at as the celestial Nile, like the earthly Nile. So it was the Nuank that took him back. That was the purpose of his boat. That later it was corrupted into Noah's Ark. Noah's Ark was taken from the Nuank. This is where it came from. Nowhere are you going to find no Noah's Ark. If you were back at the time of 4,000 years ago, or during the time of Khufu, and you asked him about Noah, boy, what's wrong with you? You know nothing about no Noah. You see my boat here? This is where the story came from. The flood, the great flood. There were many floods. There was the flood of Zoser. It was Zoser during the time when he commissioned to Khnum and to Upper Kemet to let the flood waters of the Nuank come back to flood the land, because here you see the drought took place, and Khnum said, you have not given recognition to your homeland, the south, Upper Egypt. And then we see Khnum let the flood waters open up. This is where we get the story. This information is not given to no one here but you, because you got a whole different reason for being back here. And that is to tell the truth. We want the truth and nothing but the truth. That's what we want here. You see? It's a new day. Something is opening up here. It's a spiritual consciousness. So you are looking at the Nuank, where the Noah's Ark came from. The Nuank. That's the origin. Now they got it encased in this casing here. That boat was a spiritual symbolic boat to symbolically to take Khufu back to the celestial Nile. What was the purpose of the celestial Nile? The celestial Nile symbolically took him back to his spiritual father and first father, that was Asar. So here you see the inundation of the Nile connected with the Milky Way. This was called the Nuank. The flooding of the Nile was called the Nuank. And that was the purpose of Khufu's boat, was symbolically and spiritually was to take him back to his spiritual father. And that was during the inundation. So when the Nuank took place, that spiritually told us that we would connect to the Milky Way. That Nuank was corrupted to Noah's Ark. We got the boats, brothers and sisters. Here's the boat right here. If you went back to over 4,000 years ago in the fourth dynastic period and asked Khufu about Noah, boy, what's wrong with you? I don't know nothing about old Noah. Here's my boat right here. Here's all the animals of the world doing the number one, number two, and everything. They just tell us any kind of stories. That's why they can only give you a picture of the story. But yet this flood was supposed to have taken place because we are told that God in the Bible said that he was tired, that because in Genesis chapter 1 through 6, the sons of God married the daughters of men. Is that right? This is where we were at fault in Kemet, because we married foreign women on our African throne. Although we would never marry none of our own to the foreigners, because they were goddesses. Here, during the 5th dynasty, this African king is called Sahara. Now, here's the first time that we get a concept called Sa-Ra. Sa-Ra means the son of God. They were the sons of God in Kemet, marrying the daughters of men onto the throne of Kemet. This is where you get the concept in Genesis chapter 1, where the sons of God married the daughters of men, was taken from ancient Kemet. Brothers and sisters, here we have holy texts, holy writings. We've gone into Unis's pyramid. We've gone into Teti's pyramid. Spiritual writing, when the Sahu, the spiritual body, astral projected. This is long before biblical text was even in existence. As we mentioned to you, this is the pyramid of Teti. And although you see it in the dilapidated state at this particular period, they did not make the solid stone pyramid that you saw in the Giza Plateau at this particular time. And this is the first spiritual, as they call today, religious text. This is the prototype of it all. That's what we're going to witness down here on the ancient. At this particular period of the 5th and 6th dynasty, these are the only pyramids that actually have writing on the walls. So you are down into Teddy's pyramid of the 6th dynastic period. As I said before, the difference of the Old Kingdom pyramids that you saw at the Giza Plateau, that you're equally going to see in Dajor, is that those pyramids have no medunet, no writing. But during the 5th and the 6th dynasty, we see the writing, what is known as the pyramid text. This is where the pyramid text came from. This is the prototype of the earliest religious writing. Without this, Kemet would not have Per Emharu, coming forth by day and by night. You would not have a Torah. You would not have a Bible, and you would not have a Quran. This is the origin of the earliest spiritual writing. We're talking about this pyramid is actually a book in stone. Now, we see Ursa Ma'at Ra, Septepan Ra Ramesu Ramariaman, a little practice you can say it too. Here we see that was his throne name, as they call Ramses from Ramesu, is now under the ram, symbolizes Amen. 2,000 years ago, our ancestors worshiped Amen, and his symbol was the ram because the sun was in the constellation of Aries. I show this because let's go to Christian art, and you see the ram in the European Roman Christian art. Why is that ram in their Christian art? Because they were deifying and worshiping Amen. Is this animal worship here? If they have the animal ram represented as Amen in their art, and it's not animal worship, why they come into Kemet and say animal worship and pagan and heathen and polytheism and all these other type of negative terms? Let's look at this. When you also go and look at and see the ram or the lamb over, as you see a Roman character of a Jesus here, it looks like. But when you look at that figure with the ram or the lamb over the shoulders, it was taken from Kemet when I showed you when the ram or the lamb in ancient Kemet, where the king became one with Amen and the Zoop type was the ram. But let's go over 4,000 years ago to the tomb of Meruka. I'm going to show you here, as you see the priest with the ram around his neck. But when we look at Leonardo da Vinci's artwork, you see Leonardo da Vinci's artwork with the lamb or ram around his neck. You can see where the origin of that came from. But this is carved in Meruka's tomb over 4,000 years ago, long before Leonardo da Vinci's European image of the Jesus. Okay. On this relief, brothers and sisters, you can see many concepts where they came in, as I said, like scavengers and picked different pieces. On this particular relief, you can see where the Western world through Judaism took a piece of a concept of the creation story from. You can see where the Greek philosophers took a concept of Greek philosophy from. And you can also see where Christianity took a concept, European Christianity took a concept from. So let's break it down. Again, carved in stone on the temple of Aset, right here on the island of Philae. It is here. It tells where the Western world literally came like scavengers and took various scenes to make up the Western world. And one of those scenes is we see that Hermes Trismegistus in Greek mythology, they literally took it from Tahuti. It is here that our ancestors had a study from the 42 books of Tahuti, representing science, law, and intelligence, who was represented as the ibis bird that you saw. We saw those little white birds that we saw come over here. So our ancestors looked at nature. We didn't worship the bird, but it was an attribute of science, attribute of intelligence. Tahuti writing down the deeds of our life on earth as we lived here. This is where the Western philosophical thought, Greeks took their concept of Hermes Trismegistus from Tahuti, now called thought too. So we see Judaism took God Khnum fashioning man out of clay and called him Jehovah. But notice the God Khnum fashioning man on the potter's wheel out of clay. This is where Judaism took a portion of this to make up their Genesis story with the Sanhedrins around 250 BC. From this relief right here of God fashioning man and woman on the potter's wheel. And they took other concepts of Atum from Heliopolis creation story, or the city of On, to make up their Adam as a man, when actually it was Atum the sun. And we see with European Christianity took from the goddess Isis and Horus and made up the European, again, let me express, the European version of Mary and Jesus. Copied directly from these reliefs right here. So you got Greek philosophy, where he took from Tahuti and called it Hermes Trismegistus. You got the Jehovah Genesis creation story and the Bible, where they took from Khnum, fashioning man on the potter's wheel out of clay, and they turned it into making man out of clay, Adam out of clay. And you also got Christianity right here showing Isis lactating or breastfeeding the holy child Horus, who was born of immaculate conception and virgin birth. 3 concepts just from this one relief. You see? All carved in stone. As you can see the line, one dark, one light, showing where this temple was under the water. Nobody could come back and read this. And that's why over here, if you look against this wall right here, much of it, they tried to chisel it all out. But our ancestors wrote endlessly as though one day we would forget our story. One day we would not know who we are. One day that the only thing that we put on our genetic memory bank would be an alien, a conqueror's story. In our mind, our story would not be told. And that's why Justinian in the 6th century AD came in and closed these temples down, because they were copying Christianity, the theological concepts from African people. And we'll get more into that during the lecture when we have the lecture series this afternoon. I want to even go further to show you, sisters, that y'all sacred. You are goddesses. And that's the problem with the brother today, because they took that concept out of his consciousness. That's why the rap groups around there calling her the bees and stuff. Yeah. Huh? Yeah. Okay, now look. Isis holding the Ankh of life. We know what the Ankh of life now is, a symbol of her uterus, right? So here, again, I show you, showing where the holy child is coming from her womb. See the loop? That's why she's holding it, because she wants the first immaculate conception and the first holy birth is going to come from her. So she's holding the Ankh for life. Can you see it? Not too much glare there, right?
No,
that's why the Europeans, when Justinian and the boys Theodosius, they came in, they tried to chisel it out. Couldn't deal with the real immaculate conception, but they weren't talking about one immaculate conception. Our ancestors were telling us on these reliefs that every woman could produce an immaculate conception, provided that she was on the spiritual level and the man was on the spiritual level. The both of them coming together produced immaculate virgin birth, which means a clean birth. But notice they chiseled out the Ankh, the top part of it, because that represents the womb. But the other part they kept there to represent the crucifix. You see? That symbol that they didn't take or didn't chisel out was a symbol of the cross. They didn't chisel that one out. So this is another picture of Constantine, Constantine's vision of the cross, which he is pointing to this symbol, Sec Vincius. In this symbol, we shall conquer. Through this symbol, we shall conquer. Supposedly, Constantine got the cross out on the battlefield. Another picture, but now that we know that Constantine came here, now we know where, in fact, Constantine got the cross from. Huh? Right off of your ancestor temples. Has nothing to do with, this is blowing here, has nothing to do with no crucifixion or human sacrifice. Europeans corrupted it. Now we have no understanding or meaning of what the cross means today. And chisel out the Ankh, which was a symbol for life. Now look at this. You can see where the Western world church got its design. Long before you had this, the Ptah Soka shrine was already there. For those of you who are just coming in, this is the earliest architectural structure that they call Roman arches. No such thing as Roman arches. These are African arches. If you were to take Western architecture, they say this is Roman arches, but you see this is known thousands of years ago, and this is called Ptah Soka Shrine. And here we see the earliest Immaculate Conception. Immaculate means clean. That means she has known no other man. No other man has entered her body. She will have a clean conception. It's the Europeans who corrupted the story, and now we are looked at as a European Madonna and child, where the concept was copied from here. Keep in mind that the only person who mentions the Immaculate Conception is Luke. Mark doesn't mention it, and then also Matthew doesn't mention it, and John doesn't mention it. Luke mentions it only in terms of being clean. That literally means only one man has entered her body, and that is the seed of a sar. That means clean conception. That's what immaculate means, until later on at the conference of Ephesus, where our goddess Aset was Africanized, where they brought on this whole immaculate conception of the European image of the Madonna and Child that was copied from here. Come in and see the immaculate conception. This is called the Batai Soka Shrine, by the way, Batai Soka Shrine. Many of the reliefs have been chiseled out. Fortunately, this one is here telling of the first virgin birth resurrection story, where the goddess Aset forms herself into a bird and descends on top of Asar's penis. Although you see the chiseling out of his penis, because many of the Europeans who were coming in during the Roman times could not deal with the sacredness of the body like Theodosius and Justinian and others. But Isis is going to take the seed from his body to impregnate herself. And this is the earliest concept of the Immaculate Conception, long before an angel of the Lord and Gabriel coming to Mary and said she's going to be with the Holy Child. Look how Asar is lying out on the bed. Look how the Romans copied the concept. Let's go to Rome. See the Pope lying out on the same bed, same hedge crown that Asar is wearing as well, same funeral beds, even got the lion heads that you see right here, even down to the detail of the lion heads of the funeral bed. Now, the only difference is instead of a bird perpendicular to the Pope, they have the white Mary and Jesus, the European Mary and Jesus. But here, let's take and put a set right above here, and you got the same story, the prototype of the Madonna and Child, where she was known as the Theotokos, the Mother of God. Then she in turn becomes impregnated, and she's in the form of, in this form, as the Mheted Ra, or the sacred baboon, because the baboon representing birth. You see her stomach swelled up, but she also forms the zoop type, okay, of the hippo. Why the hippo for the zoop type? Because the hippo comes out of the water. It bursts out of the water, okay? And a woman looks something like a hippo. No insult, but they saw that that symbolically shows that she's impregnated, and how the hippo comes out of the water is symbolically like breaking her water. So the zoop type that they used was the hippo. So Aset is now impregnated with the holy seed of Asar that she had taken from him when she formed herself into the bird, as you see the falcon. You know it's Aset because that's her glyph for Aset. She is now impregnated with the Holy Child. Here we see it, the earliest Holy Child concept of a virgin birth story. Here's the prototype of it all. This was the origin where people would come in. These temples were covered in sand. After they took everything they wanted, then it was covered up. Time took them over. Now we're dug out to come back to see where the story came from. The earliest Immaculate Conception and Resurrection story. Unfortunately, you can't see her on the donkey, because that is too obvious right here.
Go ahead, brothers. That's right. My relative did that. I'm serious.
Yo, you got that. Whoa. Lovely.
Here you are. Before the Grand Master himself, Ursama At Ra, Septepen Ra, Ramesu Meriamun of the 19th dynasty. That's Ramesu II, the four massive colossals that you see him sitting on his Haru throne. Now the colossal that you see right here that's fallen, some say that that was due to an earthquake. We're not sure, because we know how the plunders have come through. Is that right? Right. Here we see this facade is 100 feet tall, and the colossal statues are 65 feet tall. The Grand Master himself, and one of the greatest structures that he built right here in Abu Simbel. Sinro-Ret I. Here's an African here who set up the kingdom of Athens. Not only that, conquered into southern Russia, what is called Black Georgia today. I often wonder if that's why they call it Black Georgia, because of this African here in Sinro-Ret of the 12th dynastic period. Sinro-Ret I, who conquered into Europe at this particular time, and this huge colossal right here going back to the African origins of civilization. Now, Maspero, as my wife pointed out about, he's one of the top psychopathic races. Now keep in mind, the Cairo Museum, people come from all over the world to read this. But first of all, before I read this, let me show you this man right here named Maharpura. This is Maharpura right here. The 18th dynasty, giving praise to the great god Asaru, who the Greeks call Cyrus, sitting in his canopy, just like the Pope sits in his canopy, right? This is where they got the concept of the canopy from. But everything to deny you your history, this is what Maspero says about Maharpura. Let's read it right here. It says right here that Maharpura suggested that, Maspero suggested that Maharpura may have been the son of Thutmose IV and a Negress. There were no Negresses 3,000 years ago. At any rate, on a copy of the Book of the Dead found in a tomb and now exhibited on the wall of this room, Maharpura is depicted with his face black instead of the normal red. They were also the normal black. A detailed examination of his mummy, which showed that he died at about 20 years of age, also showed that he was Negroid, but not actually a Negro.
How would you do that?
Now this is psychopathic racism at its best. So Maspero made it a point to make sure that he would plant in all people's mind, he's Negroid, but not actually a Negro. What is a Negroid, but not actually a Negro? That's like saying he's Caucasoid, but not actually a Caucasian. Everything to deny the African story that's told right here in the African Nile Valley. Negroid, but not actually a Negro. So I want to point this out to show you the forces that we're up against, the forces that we're fighting. As I said before, many years I've come here, and Amenhotep III that you see right here was in the front, along with all the other Middle Kingdom pharaohs. And I came a year ago and I noticed that he was missing. I didn't know where he was at. And it wasn't until I came back, after searching throughout all the museum, I find him in the back corner. In this back corner with pieces that you see are broken up. He is a major pharaoh of the 12th dynastic period, a time of high literature, a time that it was known as the second golden age of Kemet. This is a brother who took and built the pyramids in Hawara. This is the brother who made the black capstone put on top of this pyramid that you just saw. But why is he in the back corner? But you're going to see Nefret and Rahotep, those two figures. Once you see them, you'll recognize them because you see them in all the books in America. That's who they show you, who were irrelevant, who were not pharaohs, who did not build major sites and so forth, and one even questioned if they had anything to do with this. But we got to question, why is Amenhotep III all the way in the back room, in the back corner for no one to see him, where he's been systematically moved out of the way? And I'm saying that this brother built his pyramid, like I said, in the area of Hawara. He's known as building the labyrinth, which is a very elaborate structure. Many rooms were in this labyrinth. So all the things that he did, but the racism of the Western world, this is where we have Amenhotep III. But you see his nose has been knocked off. This is what we're saying. Like I said before, there's no one prototype that defines an African facial characteristic. Look among us, we have all types of facial characteristics, nose structure, and even color. This is what made us truly the people who we are, the mothers and fathers of the planet Earth. But systematically, the ones that got wide nose, thick lips, have been systematically trying to erase it from the public's eye. So now we see Amenhotep III is in the back corner with other relics, and we have to come back in the back corner. And when we get around to the other side, I'm going to show you where he once stood at. So we have to understand that there's a serious psychological, intellectual war going on. And it's a serious war that's just as vicious as having our children in the classroom where the psychological war takes place, especially when that educational institution is controlled by someone who does, or other people who doesn't have the best interests of our children nor our people at heart. So come on over here, Joseph. Listen, yeah, we've been doing this. Let Joseph come over here for a minute. Here's Amenhotep III living right here today, Brother Ken Joseph. Look at Ken Joseph here, and look at Amenhotep III. Go ahead, hold your head up high, brother. No, look at us. We know. All
right, okay.
Now you can get your shots in right now. Brother gonna charge you for that shot too. Now you can see the gene is still passing on. And we got to take Joseph down to Hawara one day and see that pyramid as well. The first thing that you'll see on Egypt, many of you have seen Rahotep and Nefret. Rahotep was not a king. Nefret was not a queen. they did not hold the throne in ancient times. But it seems as though they are in all of the books in Egypt. It's the opening of the page. Now keep in mind that African people are many, many colors. I've traveled throughout the African continent. There are many, many shades of color of African people. But the point that I want to specifically point out here is the fact that Nefret and Rahotep are the ones who stand out in all the books. So when you get the books, they have selectively gone through here and have, as we know in America, a thing called passing. So they have systematically passed certain colossal pieces and so forth and artifacts. So Rahotep and Nefret are the ones who stand out in all the books, but when I showed you Amenemhet III, who should be standing right here because he was a pharaoh on the throne, who made the world's oldest road, built a pyramid in Harawa. They were not pyramid builders. So I want to point that out to show you that when you pick up a book, even when you go upstairs on your way out and you may pick up a book or just read through it, the first thing you'll see is Rahotep and Nefret. And you will not see some of the other African pharaohs that have been systematically taken out of the Cairo Museum. I remember back in 1985, he's no longer in the Cairo Museum. You see? He was there in 1985, but he's no longer here today.
This particular piece was found in a German workshop. It had no cartouches bearing her name, and it was found in the early 1920s by German excavators. But it looks nothing like this version of Nefertiti, which was found on the walls of Tel Armana, which was actually the city of Akhenaten. But yet this one has been claimed to be Nefertiti, meaning the beautiful one has come, and is supposed to be the most beautiful woman who ever lived. When in actuality, if we look at Nefertiti, this was the portrait of Nefertiti. Also, the daughters, notice the head on the daughters, and it's the elongated head. Well, many Europeans said that that elongated head was a deformity. But when we look at the sister from Zaire, we see she has the same shape in her head. It goes back to the daughters of Akhenaten. Some serious hair, huh? Looks just like the hair on our heads today. So if anybody tries to tell you that Egypt is a white civilization, you can point out this hair. So those of you who have your cameras, you want to make sure you take a good picture of it. But this is what Gaston Maspero, an Egyptologist, said about the hair in the Nile in Egypt. He says the hair was inclined to be wavy and even to curl into little ringlets, but without ever turning into the wool of the Negro. But take a look at that hair. It looks like the wool, looks like wool, doesn't it? This is a picture of the hair that's on a figure that was found. So you can see what the person looks like and what the hair looks like. I don't know any European that could claim that hair. And so you know you have to have a serious comb to get through something like that. But you know what, brothers, by the way, some hair curlers even were found in Luxor, where we're going tomorrow, dating back over 3,000 years ago. So when you see those sisters with that head full of hair curlers, she's actually practicing an ancient African fashion tradition. Okay? So come on up and get a good look at the hair. Okay, the word for earring is shaku. And so this is a style of earring that Tutankhamun and other Nubians wore. They came from Queen T, who popularized this style of earring. Now what's happening now is Liz Taylor's copying the same style of earring and making them part of her Egyptian style collection. But not just the earrings. Take a look in here because there's a bracelet that's called a Menefret. And when Amos was crowned king, his mother, Ahotep, wore this bracelet. And so while he was the one who was trying to drive the Hyksos out of our land and preserve our culture, Liz Taylor's now trying to rip it off. And here's that bracelet.